Hello everyone, welcome to Working with BimlScript to ease and automate your SSIS development. I'm Jeff Malacher with Bennett Adelson Consulting. This session will be the 1 hour equivalent of the hour 45 session, so some things condensed but still the meat and potatoes of the content included. Our agenda will be what is Biml and why should you care? Show of hands, who here has worked with Biml or heard of it? Who's heard of it? Okay, this will be an intro session. We'll talk about Biml, we'll talk about the history of Biml, and we'll also talk about what BimlScript is and why you should care about it. Now, Biml and BimlScript are different things, but they're used somewhat interchangeably sometimes. They go together. We'll go over it all. We'll show you how to get started with doing it. We'll have lots of demos, which is good. I like demos. And, of course, we'll take questions. So, who am I? Bit of background. When I first started speaking, first session I gave was at like a SQL Saturday. I spoke for about 10 minutes and then asked any questions, and someone raised their hand, and I said, question. He said, who are you? Well, now I know I need to have a who am I slide. So my name is Jeff Malacher. I'm an enterprise architect at Bennett Adelson on the business intelligence team. My education's from the University of Michigan. I realize I'm giving this session in Columbus, so I'll pause for booze. And Bennett Adelson's a strategic managed partner with Microsoft. You probably saw our site, bennettadelson.com. My blog's at jeffmalacher.com, and my Twitter handle at jeffmalacher. So that's it. Let's talk about Biml. What is Biml? Well, here's some example Biml. And it's basically XML. It stands for Business Intelligence Markup Language. And it's an XML dialect for easily defining business intelligence objects, specifically SSIS packages, analysis services cubes, and data models. We'll just be talking about packages today and a little bit of data models. You can only cover so much in 1 hour. So we'll focus on SSIS. Maybe I'll have a part 2, a Biml 2 Electric Boogaloo session where I go over analysis services. But for right now, we'll just be focusing on SSIS. Now, Biml is published as an open language specification. It's XML, so you can write it in anything, but if you want to compile it, you can do that in Visual Studio. BIDS helper add-in will help you with that in BIDS, or what is now called SQL Server Data Tools, BI. You can also use Varigence's. We'll talk about that company, Varigens, a little bit later. You can also use their IDE called Mist. That's actually paid, though. Now, let me zoom in here. So without knowing too much, you can probably take a guess of what's going on here. So you can read this because it's XML and it's pretty readable. You can say, okay, I see some connections. I see source and destination and some connection strings. And it looks like we're defining a package. Constraint mode linear, don't know what that is, but I can see we're doing tasks, executing SQL, we've got a data flow. So it looks like we're truncating a table and then loading it. So without knowing too much, you can already, as a human, read this and get an idea and start to visualize what this SSIS package that this is defining looks like. So, bit of background of Biml. Early 2007, Microsoft CSS, their customer service and support, internally started Project Vulcan. I think, wasn't it Austin Powers that had Project Vulcan? I'm sure it's in a lot of things. It's like they just chose the most generic name they could think of. Project Vulcan. Why not? It was, what was happening was they had a lot of business intelligence artifacts they were helping customers out with, and they needed a common way to define it. So Project Vulcan was a way to define these business intelligence objects in XML. Now this is not Biml, but this is similar to what would become Biml. I'll explain why in a second. Because over time, that project sort of lost development time, stopped being emphasized, and so they put the source code out in Codeplex, and people who looked at it said, hey, there's a lot of power here, but not a lot of documentation or training resources. It's not enough for an enterprise to use. So, late 2008, this guy, Scott Curry, he worked with Microsoft. He was a Microsoft employee, worked on Vulkan in their CSS. He goes off, he founds his own company, Verigence, to further this endeavor. Verigence then publishes the specification for Biml, Business Intelligence Markup Language. Excuse me. I'm told it did not use any source code from Project Vulkan, but it's very similar in that it's defining these objects in XML. So Verigence then creates and sells their product Mist, which is an IDE for working with Biml. As Biml popularity grows, its functionality, including the compiling and generation, is added into the open source project on Codeplex that is called Bids Helper. It's still called Bids Helper, even though Bids isn't called Bids anymore. So if you want to start working with Biml and BimlScript, you've already got the capabilities. If you're working in Visual Studio, you can just get the Bids Helper for free, and then boom, you're developing SSIS packages using Biml. So what is BimlScript? Well, BimlScript's what's between the highlighted less than pound signs here on the right, and it extends Biml by allowing you to insert code, be it C# or Visual Basic, into your Biml, and that's how you're going to be able to generate Biml and apply and merge changes. So let me zoom into this. So again, without knowing too much beforehand, again I said the Biml is what's between the areas that are less than pound. And you can see, yes, that's some .NET there, doing a .NET for each loop. Excuse me, C# for each loop. And we're looping through a collection of tables. So you can see, okay, you must be making a data flow for each collection of tables, and you're inserting the table name into a few spots. So, okay, you're making a data flow for each table to move the table from a source to destination. So, pretty easily readable, and again, pretty easy to get your head around as far as how this would make an SSIS package. So if we were treating this like an SAT test, as far as BimlScript versus Biml, you can always think of the SAT tests, okay, effervescent is to transcendent, as verisimilitude is to whatever, those sort of things. So you can think BimlScript is to Biml as .NET is to HTML when you write ASP.NET. ASP.NET, same thing, you're putting .NET code nuggets into your markup to dynamically generate markup. It's the same thing, BimlScript to Biml. Does that make sense? So here's a diagram of the Biml language. Within it, you've got Biml and you've got BimlScript. Now, when you're writing Biml, you're just writing XML, with your greater than, less than signs. And you're also defining directives to tell your Biml compiler how you want things compiled. We'll talk about that in demos. And when you're writing BimlScript, you've got control blocks that you write in your language of choice, be it C# or Visual Basic. And so if you're putting in some C#, you use some bracket pound. Use this bracket pound equals if you need to define and evaluate a given expression like we saw in that previous example. There was the table name that was using the bracket pound equals. Then there's also, if you want to define your own method, the bracket pound plus is how you would go about doing that. This will all make sense as we go through this in demos, which we'll get started doing right now. So when you want to start working with Biml, like I said, you're just going to be working in Visual Studio Bids or SQL Server Data Tools, same as you did before, but you'll have to get this version of Bids Helper at bidshelper.codeplex.com. So let's go there. So Bids Helper is a great tool for business intelligence development. It's got a lot of great stuff, including Biml. So come to downloads and you see it's got all the versions you need, 2005, 8, 12, up to 14. I've already downloaded and installed 2012. It's an easy install. And now when I'm in SQL Server Data Tools, or formerly known as Bids, This is an SSIS project. Here you can see in Solution Explorer I've got one package that I made manually, the old-fashioned way, in SSIS already, but since I have my bids helper installed, I can right-click the project here and do Add New Biml File. Here in my dog food con temp, not contemp. I guess it should be dog food con temporary. I've added a new BimlScript file, and I can now begin writing Biml. So I could write, the IntelliSense is pretty good, so I can define packages. I can say make a package, everything gets a name, so this will be basic data load. Close it. And it's pretty good about telling you what you do not have and need. So it says constraint mode is missing. What's constraint mode? So you see here constraint mode, linear, parallel. What does that mean? I'll choose linear, and basically it's a difference between this is linear, this is parallel. As you're defining tasks in Biml, if you put linear, it's going to assume to put things in a linear on success progression. So it's a nice time saver. I like to use linear. Now, once I have this, in Solution Explorer I can right-click that and generate SSIS packages. And bam, there's my basic data load. I've made a package using Biml. Of course, it's empty, it doesn't do anything. So let's make it actually do something. Well, let me show you. This manual data load that I built in just a few minutes before this session. It's a very simple package. I want to show you my source and destination database here in Management Studio. So my source database is here in Object Explorer, demo source on my local host. It's got one table, table 1, and that same exists on same table exists on my destination server, my localhost /inst1. Here's table 1. So I have a connection to demo source here on the left and demo dest here on the right. For the duration of this talk, source will be on the left, destination will be on the right. So you see here I've created table 1, very simple table, column 1 and column 2. Some simple data, there it is. And that table is empty on the destination. So I need to actually load some data over there. So this manual package does a truncate of the destination if there's anything there first. So you truncate table 1. And my data flow task is just going to load table 1 from source to destination. So run this guy, make sure everything's in order, and then we'll start seeing how we can define a functioning package like this in Biml. So ran that, and all is well, and things moved over. So let's make this in Biml. I'm going to come to my first BimlScript. So I've got this package defined, and within a package I can define a collection of tasks. So I will start with, what did we have first? An execute SQL task, and here you can see in your IntelliSense, similar to your toolbox if you think of your toolbox in SSIS, basically anything you can do in SSIS, you can do with Biml, with the exception of like custom control flow tasks and such. So I'll start with an execute SQL task. Everything needs a name, so I'll call this truncate dest table 1. That usually again complains that I need a connection name. So I'll give it a connection name, because you know in SSIS you define connections so it knows where to do this sort of thing. So I'll say this is at the connection name called dest. So in Biml you're not just defining packages, you can define other things like connections. So when I say connection name dest, it needs to know what are the properties of that. So I'll make an OnlyDB connection and call it dest. And it takes a name and a connection string. I'll do one of these for source as well. I'm not brave enough to write my own connection string. I've got it in the snippet. There we go. Close it up. There you go. Very simple. I'll put a connection string here too. And this is going to go to not localhost, but localhost inst 1, not to demo source, but to demo dest. So when we say connection name dest, it knows what connection to use. And within my execute SQL task, I actually write my SQL within direct input. And I'll say truncate table 1. So let's generate SSIS packages and see if everything went okay. And this is going to pop up and tell me, hey, you're about to overwrite an existing package. Do you want to do that? Yes, I do. Commit. This is going to, Visual Studio is going to say, this file's changed. Do you want to reload it? Yes, I do. Give that a second to reload. And now we have basic data load here with our truncate destination table 1 task. So, we ignored all this other stuff we didn't need and just gave it the bare bones destination, name for the task, and what it actually was. And now we have a functioning SSIS package that we made in Biml. Let's make sure it truncated the destination data, and it did. So, alright. Functioning package written in a short amount of Biml. But we got one other thing to do. We got to make our data flow task to actually move the data over. So make a data flow task. I'll call it load table 1. Table 1. And anything you do, any collection of blue lines within a data flow task will be in the transformations collection. And I'll start with an OnlyDB source. Again, everything needs a name. This will be, just call it source table. Again, it needs a connection name. So where am I pulling this from? Source. And then, what's my table going to be? So I'm going to choose an external table input. The IntelliSense is pretty good in here. And the table called table 1. So we got to wire that guy up to a destination. So our destination will be an OnlyDB destination called dest table, and the connection name dest. So you can see it's mirroring the source already. You can probably guess that instead of external table input, external table output, called table 1. And there it is. You'll note we didn't have to wire up the success of this to start this because our constraint mode linear will do that for us. We didn't have to wire up columns because it's going to assume to map things by name from one to the other. We could, in theory, define, well, not in theory, in practice, define a collection of columns here, and we could say, you know, source column call 1 goes to target column call 1. And we could do that for all our columns, but if that's not there, it assumes to map things by name. So I'm going to regenerate this package, generate SSIS packages. Yes, I want to overwrite. Yes, I want to reload. And like I said here, see, it did all the wiring up for us. Source to destination. Mapped everything by column names. Let's run it and see if it works. Truncate and load. 4 rows moved. Looks like all is well. So awesome. We just made our original package using Biml. Now, when I first told one of my Bennett Adelson coworkers, giving him the elevator speech about what Biml was, saying, "Oh yeah, define SSIS packages in XML," he said, correctly, that SSIS has always stored things in XML behind the scenes. And that's absolutely true. I could look at this manual package, I could go to its folder, and I could open that manual data load up in Notepad. And this is the XML behind the scenes, and isn't it just so nice and easy to read? No, it's not. It's ugly, and no one would ever try to write anything using this. So, which would you rather work with? This, or our lovely Biml here? I personally would rather work with this Biml here on the right. I mean, imagine trying to source control this on the left, like checking it into TFS or Subversion or something, tracking changes and code reviewing. It would be crazy, whereas this is easy to read source code. You could check this in, you could track changes, code review, etc. So that's a big selling point, I think. Any questions so far? So, we've talked about Biml, but we also want to talk about BimlScript is a big part of this. Now, BimlScript, like I said, is going to be inserting .NET code into your Biml to dynamically generate Biml and thus dynamically generate your packages. So I'm going to start a new Biml file, and I'll call this generate packages, because we're going to use it to generate multiple packages. I'm going to open it up. So I'm going to start just writing basic Biml for now, and then I'll put in the BimlScript. So I'll make a package, call it generated package, and again it gets constraint mode. I'll make it linear. So here we have Biml already. Looks good. Now let's write some BimlScript. So again, if I do my less than pound, now I can start writing some .NET. So I could write a for loop, say for int I equal to 0, I less than, say, 5, I plus plus, loop through this thing 5 times. Open it up. So there's my for loop, and I'll put that for loop around this, because I want to, say, generate 5 packages. Now you might be looking at all of these squiggles here and thinking, hey, you must have messed something up, Jeff. Well, it's an unfortunate shortcoming of working with XML in Visual Studio, in that their XML designer does not have native support for BimlScript. So it's going to see this, it's going to say, hey, that's not XML, and it's going to complain. If you're working with Virgins Mist, you wouldn't have that. But if you're working for free here in BIDS, that's what you get. But you can always come in Solution Explorer, right-click your Biml file, and check Biml for errors. And I know already this is going to give me an error, and who can tell me why? Well, let's check it for errors. You can see the name generated packages is repeated. It's repeated 4 times. So it's like, oh, okay, hey, my loop did work. It ran 4 times, made that Biml 5 times, and 4 of those were a repeat because the name needs to be unique. So let's make this name unique using our value of I. So to interrogate a value, you do less than pound equals, and then I could do I. Now I is an integer. I could do I.toString to get the string, but bracket pound equals is smart enough that when you're doing it, it knows you're probably doing a toString. So you don't need that. I could just do that. I'll check that for errors, and all is well. And I can right-click and generate SSIS packages, and bam, package 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of them blank. So there's our first BimlScript that we just wrote. Dynamically generating packages using .NET code. Any questions so far? Now, that's not all that useful just to loop through things for a set number. So let's actually make a package that does things based on the existing state of our environment. Well, a lot of times in SSIS, you've got, say, a master package that executes all your other packages. So let's do that. Let's create a Biml file that'll make a package that executes all packages. So I'll add a new Biml file, and I will call this execute all packages.biml. Again, I'll start by writing basic Biml before I get into BimlScript. So I'm going to make one package. I'm going to call it execute all packages. Yeah, it needs a constraint mode of linear. And so I'll define within this collection of tasks, as we're going to need an execute package task. So we'll call this execute. I'll just start with basic Biml first, so I'll just hardcode basic data load. So we're going to execute basic data load, and we're going to say execute the package whose package name is basic data load. Ba-dum. So there we go. It all looks good, not giving me any squiggles or anything. But we want to do this dynamically for all existing packages. So we want to repeat this chunk of Biml that I have highlighted for every package. So let's start a for loop to do that. So I'm going to do C# for each loop. So I'm going to do for each package in, and I'm going to call an object called root node. Root node is all currently generated Biml that I can interrogate. So I can do root node.packages. Open up that loop. Close the loop down here. And now, instead of basic data load, I could do == package. Now package is an object, so I could do package.name.toString, but that == is smart enough to know if you're just doing package, you want a toString name of the package. So I'll copy that into here, and that will be our BimlScript. Now, I know that this is going to give me an error right now, and I'll show you it right now. And it's an error you'll get from time to time. It says element tasks in namespace has incomplete content. List of possible elements expected. Staging, container, execute SQL, blah, blah. It's saying, oh, here's all the things you can put in tasks, but it's incomplete. It says tasks is empty. It's a verbose way of saying tasks is empty. So why would tasks be empty? That for each must not have executed. Well, I wish I could debug into this and figure out why root node.packages was not giving me any existing packages. But since I can't do that, I could do things, say, the old-fashioned way and just, pop a message box. So I'll do that. I'll do a message box. And count is, and I'll interrogate root node.packages.count.toString. So let's check that for errors. And this error is now going to tell me message box does not exist. Well, in the same way in C# you can define using directives. You can define directives to your Biml as well. You could say, with =@, that's a directive, and you can import a namespace by doing import namespace. So you can do things like import system.data, check that for errors. Of course, I need message box, which is in system.windows.forms. I will copy this. Well, here's something to note. When I did that copy and paste, you see it added this stuff and moved it over and did stuff I didn't want it to do. That's because onPaste does formatting for you. Let me show you. There, I just did paste, and it adds that extra stuff. So one way to do that is to paste and then immediately do an undo, and it removes the formatting. Another way, because you might get this a lot if you're copying code off the internet, you could come to Tools, Options, Text Editor, XML Formatting, and uncheck onPaste from Clipboard, and that will remove your formatting then onPaste. So it's a nice way to do it. So I'll paste this here, I'll undo, and instead of system.data, I want system.windows.forms. Now the error is going to tell me namespace. You might see this when you write .NET. Namespace does not exist. Are you missing an assembly reference? Well, we've learned how to do like a using directive for a namespace. You can also add an assembly reference with ~@assembly, and I can't remember where this assembly is located, so I have it in a snippet. ~@assembly, give it the full path to the DLL. So you're going to use, .NET assemblies to your heart's content, which is pretty cool, so you can start to envision the possibilities now. So now I can check for errors, and just by checking for errors, everything is fine, and it runs and tells me, much to my suspicion, that count is 0, and that's why task is empty. So why is that count 0? Well, root node.packages, like I said, is the already generated Biml, but as this is executing, that is empty. But watch what happens if I say select my first BimlScript that I know has one package in it, and my execute packages. So I'll select this one, hold down the control key and select my execute all packages, and then check for errors. Now it found one because it already has one package, and it's okay. So now I could generate SSIS packages. Yes, overwriting, clicking yes through everything, and looking at my execute all packages, I will see that from that other one I chose, it's doing an execute basic data load. So that seems great, but watch what happens when I select generate packages, and then hold down control and do execute all packages. Check Biml for errors, count is still 0. Well, why is that? That should have had 5 packages in this thing, right? Well, this is because of how Biml is compiled in your BIDS helper compiler, and it is compiled in tiers. And I can define a tier for this execute all packages by doing ~@, and I could say template tier, and it's 0 based, and it's going to compile everything at template tier 0, then at tier 1, then at tier 2, and so forth as high as you've got. So I'll call this tier 2 because by default any BimlScript, they all have tiers, and the default is a Biml file with no BimlScript is tier 0. A Biml file with BimlScript, like this one, is tier 1. So those are the tiers it puts things in. It compiles the stuff in tier 0, tier 1, and if things are in the same tier, it goes by the order in which you select them, and you don't want to have to be bound. It's actually the reverse order in which you select things, and you don't want to be bound to that. So since we know this is tier 1, if I make this tier 2, now I can select both as I did before, check it for errors, and things compile in the correct order. So I could select everything now, and I know they will all compile in my correct order. See, I got count 6. Yes, I want to overwrite. Yes, I want to reload. And my execute all packages now will do what I wanted it to do, which is execute all the packages defined in our Biml. So you see it does that in a linear fashion. I can run this, and you can see that it's going to run all my packages. Here it is running basic data load, that's fine, and then here it is running generated packages 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are just blank. So what have we learned? We learned a lot in that. We learned about writing for each. We learned about root node, the root node object, how that works. We learned about tiers and how things are compiled so that you can interrogate root node in a way that gives you what you want. We learned about how to use namespaces, how to add other assemblies, how that can help us debug. Another thing about this template, you can also define a language for your BimlScript. Default is C#, but I could also put VB here if I wanted to write in VB. So we've learned a lot in that, and again, a little chunk of code that can be very powerful. Any questions so far? So one of the things that excited me as I first started understanding BimlScript was, hey, wait, so I can dynamically generate Biml and thus dynamically generate SSIS packages. Well, that'd be great, because then if something changes in my source database, say if I add table 2 here, if I add another table, so I'll just make table 2, I'll make it look exactly like table 1, because we don't need too much difference in our demonstration database here. So now I've got 2 tables that I need to load. So if I had to do that in my manual package, I think I'd have to, maybe duplicate this data flow. I'd have to add to my truncate dest, or maybe duplicate it. Even if I were writing this basic data load Biml, I'd probably have to, repeat these 2 items. Well, wait, we've got this thing BimlScript now, so we could do this dynamically based on what's in the source, right? I'm like, okay, that's cool. That way I don't have to do all this manual upkeep of my SSIS packages. So I'm going to copy out our original Biml file here and show you how we might do this now that we have, more tables being added. I'll paste that and reuse this. I'll call this dynamic data load. So this is going to generate a package called dynamic data load. Now note, I now have these connections in multiple files. That's going to get redundant. Probably good practice to have common things in one place. Well, we already learned about tiers and compiling things in tiers, so that's going to enable us to keep Biml, reuse Biml in common files. So I could copy out these connections, and I'm going to put it in a Biml file called connections. And since I want this to be compiled first, I'll make sure it's at tier 0, and to remember that, I'll name it with a prefix 0. So I'll put these connections in here, and I'll make sure to define bracket pound at template tier 0. Now my dynamic data load, I'll put it tier 1, so I know it gets compiled after that. And I'll even rename that with a prefix 1, so I know what tier it's at. So there, we've already cleaned up our dynamic data load a little bit. So if I check that for errors, you'll see it does know what destined source are, so I have to select them both, check for errors, and then everything's fine. So we want to put a loop around these 2 items And everywhere we see table 1, we want the name of the table in our loop. Well, I already have a little bit of plumbing code here in my other Visual Studio. Wrote this small application here just to loop through all tables and get the string of the table. It's some basic ADO.NET plumbing code. I'll show it here. It's doing a SQL connection, SQL data adapter. It's running this command, select name from systables, ordering by name against this connection, using a data adapter, filling it to a data table, and for each row, it's adding the row called name to a collection of tables, and finally returning them in a list of strings. Some basic plumbing, not very exciting, but exciting when we can put that into our Biml. So, if you want to define a method, because let me stub out how we're going to call this here first. I'm going to do a for each. I want to do for each table in, and I'm going to call my getTables method, right? And I'm going to go from there to there. And everywhere we see table 1, instead of table 1, we're going to do bracket pound equals table. Right? So put it there. There I had to do Control V, Control Z. So put it in all places, but we have to define our getTables method. So we've learned about bracket pound equals, bracket pound at for directives. To put in your own method is bracket pound plus. Put it in that, and this is where we will add our getTables. So I will just copy and paste it out of here. Copy, paste. There's my code. And let's see if we have our dynamic data load package now. So I'll check that for errors. Oh, a few errors. Oh, it's saying it doesn't know what a SQL connection is because it's missing a namespace. That's easy to add. So we'll resolve this with bracket pound at import namespace. We'll need system.data, and we'll also need system.data.SQL client. Control C, Control V, Control Z to undo that formatting. System.data.SQL client. Saving. Now I will generate SSIS packages. Here's my dynamic data load. And look, it made a truncate for table 1, a load for table 1, a truncate for table 2, and a load for table 2. Dynamically. Which I think is really, really cool. So I could run this and see that, in fact, it handled every table I had in the database. In this case, just these two. So, some pretty exciting stuff, I think. Now, we might want to clean this up a little bit because it's kind of annoying to have all this ugly plumbing code here right in the middle of my Biml. So, in addition to, we've already learned about selecting multiple Biml files and how they compile together. We can also include a file by doing a directive called include file. And so we could say include file helper methods .biml. So then we can move things over into a file called helper methods. Actually, can't recall. Is it file or file name? Good thing I keep my directives in a snippet. Oh, it's include file. I got it right. Gotta learn to trust myself. So we could take this ugly plumbing code here, rip it out, and move it over to this file called helper methods.biml. We don't even need the Biml tags. We just put it in there. Oh, just occurred to me, we need our usings. Cut those out. Put those in. So I could check that for errors. All is well. So now my dynamic data load looks quite a bit cleaner. And I could select tier 0, tier 1. I don't need to select helper methods when I do an include file. So I could generate SSIS packages. Yes, I want to overwrite. Yes, I want to reload. And so that's a great way to clean things up and to put common methods in an included file. Now, one thing I wondered as I was developing Biml and BimlScript is, can I see the Biml before it's generated into an SSIS package or packages? Like if I made table 3, and that means that, oh, the Biml is now going, the BimlScript will stay the same, but the Biml that's generated will now have another table, and that's going to get added to my package. Can I see the Biml before it actually becomes an SSIS package? Well, thankfully I found a blog post of someone who did that, and I will include the file to do this in the resources for the session. They should already be up online. And so it is a snippet called Get Compiled Biml. I have it in a snippet, so I'll just insert it right here. Get rid of all the ugly formatting that happened because I didn't uncheck the paste. So what is this doing? Putting this at a tier higher than you're probably going to go, making use of an assembly. Hey, we know that name, Intelligence, company that made Biml. They've got some code that you can make use of here in variance.header.core-lower.schema management. Hard to remember, but keep it in a snippet, you'll be fine. And with that, we can call root node.getBiml, and that gets the XML of all existing Biml. So if this runs last, that'll get everything. And then the rest, these lines are just writing it to a file here at ctemp get compiled Biml. So that means if I select you, and you, get compiled Biml, all I have to do is check it for errors, and then in my ctemp directory, here I have my compiled Biml. And look, it's got table 1, table 2, and table 3 added. If I added, say, table 4, so we'll add table 4 at source and destination. Then I could use that as a great way to check. So, check Biml for errors. I don't even have to generate. And it's going to say, yes, reload, get compiled Biml, yes. And look, it added table 4. Great way to see things, and I've put the get compiled Biml snippet in the resources for this session. Now, you might be thinking, hey, we wrote that special plumbing code to get the source tables. Is there a better way? Because that's probably a common thing. Well, yes, absolutely. And this namespace, Variance Hadron Core Lower Schema Management, if you use some of their code in that, you can import a source database and then do things that'll allow you to do a lot of cool things and get a lot of information out of your source database. Now, I mentioned you can, in addition to defining just packages, you can also define within Biml data models. So I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to define tables in this. And I'm going to start by writing by hand, but then I'm going to actually use some of Variance's code to import it. And I'm going to call it 1 tables because I want this at tier 1 after the connections. So I'll come in here. I'll make sure to define it at bracket pound at template tier 1. So within Biml, I can start defining collection of tables. So say, for example, a table called table 1, and oh, it's already complaining to me about something. Oh, it needs a schema, as tables often do. So I could say, you know, a schema name, and this is going to be from demo source.dbo. Now that means I also have to define schemas. So I'll define a collection of schemas, and I'll have a schema called DBO from a database name called demo source. Now it needs to know what that database is, so I also need to define a collection of databases. So I'll make a database called demo source, and it has to come from a connection. So I'll bring it from my source connection. So checking that for errors, this is probably going to tell me I don't know what source is because I need to select tables and connections. I'll check Biml for errors, and all is well. So let's do this dynamically with some Variagent's help, because we want to loop through tables and we want to make our data model. So I'm going to make sure I include the Variagent's namespace. Keeping it a snippet because I can't remember Variagent's header and core lower schema management. And to import from a database is going to take a little IFM code. Everybody know what IFM code is? It's effing magic. It's, you can call it magic, but it's actually pretty easy to understand what it's doing. It's using that root node, and because we're using the Variagent's assembly, we can do things like import database, import DB, and you can see, you can guess what it's doing. You know, it's giving it some options to exclude some things, and once we have that, we could write a for each loop that looks like this. For each of our table in, and we'll reference import result dot table nodes is how we'll do it. Open it up right there. Close it right here. And there, instead of table 1, we'll do bracket pound equals table. Now, table's an object. I can do table.name, but it's smart enough just to do that. So let's see if I did that correctly. I'll select those, and I'll do my get compiled Biml trick to see if that gives me what I want. Yes, reload my compiled Biml, and look, it gave me table 1, 2, 3, and 4. Nice, everything I want. But I need some columns, right? So within this table, tables often have collections of columns, don't they? So we're going to need columns, and look at everything you need to define in a column. You need a name, a scale, you know, if it's a typed string, you're going to need a length. Is it read-only? All sorts of stuff. So you might be thinking, oh gosh, that's going to be a lot, right? Well, not as much as you think. We're going to for each through each column in table.columns, because table has a collection of columns. So here's our for each. Now here's where you're thinking, oh, we got to do all sorts of crazy stuff to figure this out. No, you don't. You could just do bracket pound equals, and this is where I start to love how easy Biml is. You could just do column.get Biml, and that gives you all the Biml you need for all your columns. So let's try that. Connections, tables, get compiled Biml, check it for errors. Yes, reload my compiled Biml. And look, it got everything it needs. Its data type, its length, if it's nullable. So that's really awesome because we have a data model defined. And now, in our dynamic data load, by the way, I'm going to switch this to tier 2, so I know it compiles after tables. Instead of calling get tables, I'll forget helper methods because we don't need that anymore. I can now call root node.tables, And so I could select tier 0, 1, 2, generate SSIS packages. Yes, I want to overwrite. Yes, I want to reload. And dynamic data load now has all 4 tables we need. And you might be saying, okay, Jeff, that was a way around to get back to exactly what we had. Well, but now the difference is root node, we just don't have a collection of strings of tables. We can actually do things with these tables. Say, for example, I didn't want to pull directly from a table, but wanted to pull from, say, a query. You know, a query like select all the columns from the name of the table. All right. How do I get all the columns? Well, I can get that by calling tables.get column list. And let's say instead of wanting to truncate, I wanted to drop and create the table. You might be thinking, oh gosh, that's tons of stuff to figure out, you know, dynamically generate code to get everything you need for generating a table. Well, I could do, because I'm using my root node and I've defined all my tables in this very short little bit of code, now I could do table dot, I love this, get drop and create DDL, data definition language. So now let's generate SSIS packages here. 0, 1, 2. Generate SSIS packages. Yes, I want to overwrite. Yes, I want to reload. Again, we took a very little bit of time and a little bit of code to generate our data model in tables using variagents, and now we can do cool things like, say, look at, you know, the load for table 2 here. It got the column list it needed to wire things up. You look at the drop and create, it did everything it needs to drop and create the table just by calling that get drop and create DDL. Awesome, awesome, awesome stuff. Once you can get things into a data model and then call root node, get drop and create DDL, get column list, a whole bunch of other stuff. To wrap up, why would you use BimlScript? Well, time savings. We saw we put a little bit of development in here in this hour, but now when everything's changed at our source, we can have dynamic package changes. And I love that because I hate whenever little things change at a source that I got to go through and, you know, bit by bit change every little piece of my package painstakingly through the IDE. It is easier to track changes. Again, imagine checking in that big long XML for a very simple package that's behind the scenes there when you're not using Biml. You can't view your history, track your changes, whereas you write Biml, you have nice source that's easy to code review and easy to view history, and that can help you enforce design patterns. For additional resources, I strongly recommend BimlScript.com. It's a great place. They got a sandbox in Silverlight, where if you just want to write some Biml and BimlScript just in the web, you can download Bid's Helper from bidshelper.codeplex.com, or just Bing Bid's Helper. Variagents has good documentation. I'd say particularly look at the AST root node, because that's where we did our get, drop, and create DDL and all that stuff. SQL Server Central has a great, in their Stairway series, they got Stairway to Biml. Look that up. It might be hard to remember, so just, you know, look up just Bing Stairway to Biml, and you'll find it. It's great, like 5-part session by the end. You'll have a great knowledge of Biml, and then maybe after that, take a look at Create and Load a Staging Environment by Scott Curie, guy who started this all. He's got a great one up on BimlScript.com. So, any questions? And thank you very much for listening.